Sit-ins, the freedom race, the Mississippi Blood Summers, demonstrations all over the country, the FSM movement, the teachings, and the mounting protests over Lyndon Strangelove's foreign policy. All of this, the thousands of little details, show me it is time to straighten up and fly right. That is why I decided to concentrate on my writings and efforts in this area. We are a very sick country. That was 50 years ago, and Trump just exposed his sickness further. We are a very sick country. I perhaps am sicker than most, but I accept that. I told you in the beginning that I am extremist by nature. So it is only right that I should be extremely sick. I am very familiar with the Eldridge who came to prison, but that Eldridge no longer exists, and the one I am now is in some ways a stranger to me. You may find this difficult to understand, but it is very easy for one in prison to lose his sense of self. Prison is the worst form of fucking punishment ever, yo. Whoever came up with the idea for locking people up, man, should be shot in the head 10 times over, yo, if that's even possible. You may find this difficult to understand, but it is very easy for one in prison to lose his sense of self. And if he has been undergoing all kinds of extreme, involved, and unregulated changes, then he ends up not knowing who he is. Take the point of being attractive to women. You can easily see how a man can lose his arrogance or certainty on that point while in prison. When he's in the free world, he gets constant feedback on how he looks from the number of female heads he turns when he walks down the street. In prison, he gets only hate stares and sour frowns. Years and years of bitter looks. Individuality is not nourished in prison, neither by the officials nor by the convict. It is a deep hole out of which to climb. What must be done, I believe, is that all these problems, particularly the sickness between the white woman and the black man, must be brought out into the open, dealt with, and resolved. I know that the black man's sick attitude towards the white woman is a revolutionary sickness. It keeps him perpetually out of harmony with the system that is oppressing him. Many whites flatter themselves with the idea that the Negro man's lust and desire for the white dream girl is purely an aesthetic attraction. But nothing could be farther from the truth. His motivation is often of such a bloody, hateful, bitter, and malignant nature that whites would really be hard-pressed to find it flattering. I have discussed these points with prisoners who were convicted of rape, and their motivations are very plain. But we are very reluctant to discuss these things with white men who, by and large, make up the prison staff. I believe that in the experience of these men lies the knowledge and wisdom that must be utilized to help these youngsters who are headed in the same direction. I think all of us, the entire nation, will be better off if we bring it all out front. And lots of people's feelings will be hurt, but that is the price that must be paid. It may be that I can harm myself by speaking frankly and directly, but I do not care about all of that. Of course, I want to get out of prison badly, but I shall get out someday. I am more concerned with what I am going to be after I get out. I know that by following the course with which I have charted, I will find my salvation. If I had followed the path laid down for me by the officials, I'd undoubtedly have long since been out of prison. But I'd be less of a man. I'd be weaker and less certain of where I want to go, what I want to do, and how to go about it. The price of hating other human beings is loving oneself less. Did you hear that, Donald Trump? So the more you hate on Obama, the less you love yourself. It makes sense. Yo, real talk, yo. Like the next couple of chapters are so awesome. I, but I plan to skip that. And like I said at the beginning, at some point in the beginning, parental advisory is greatly advised when listening to the part I have from Eldridge Cleaver Solonice. You know what I mean? He was the man speaking on certain truths 50 years ago. I can't knock him on it. It's his opinions. I don't agree with it. I'm not going to speak on what I agree with, I don't agree with. We're going to leave that one alone. I'm going to wait for the backlash that we can deal with it then. I got to stay relevant, right? So, part 2, Blood of the Beast. The white race and its heroes. Oh, what a rat race. These are a rat race. Oh, what a rat race. This is your rat race. Rat race. What a rat race. See that right there? They'd rather see that, you know what I mean? They'd rather see Will Kane up there, Will Kane up there with Max and Stephen A. That's the image, you know what I mean? You gotta have the actual true racists in Will Kane up there, and then Stephen A, who's obviously gonna always take the side of progressiveness, and Max Kellerman, who's always gonna take the side of progressiveness, playing the moderate whites who moderate. It's awesome. Gotta love it. Part 2, Blood of the Beast. The white race and its heroes. White people cannot in the generality be taken as models of how to live. Rather, the white man is himself in sore need of new standards, which will release him from his confusion and place him once again in fruitful communion with the depth of his own being. That's from James Baldwin in The Fire Next Time. Right from the go, let me make one thing absolutely clear. I am not now, nor have I ever been a white man. Nor, nor I hasten to add, am I now a black Muslim, though I used to be. But I am an Ofe watcher, a member of that uncharted uncharted amorphous league which has members on all continents and the islands of the sea. Ophir Watchers Anonymous, OWA. We might be Ophir Watchers Anonymous, we might be called, because we exist concealed in the shadows wherever colored people have known oppression by white enslavers, colonizers, imperialists, and neo-colonialists. Did it irritate you, compatriot, for me to string those epithets out like that? Tolerate me. My intention was not necessarily to sprinkle salt over anyone's wounds. I did it primarily to relieve a certain pressure on my brain. Do you cop that? If not, then we're in trouble. Because we ophir washers have a pronounced tendency to slip into that mode. Because we ophir washers have a pronounced tendency to slip into that mode, if it is if it is bothersome to you, it is quite a task for me, because not too long ago it was my way of life to preach as ardently as I could that the white race is a race of devils, created by their maker to do evil and make evil appear as good. That the white race is a natural, unchangeable enemy of the black man, who is the original man, owner, maker, cream of the planet Earth. That the white race was soon to be destroyed by Allah. That the black man could then inherit the earth, which has always in fact been his. I have, so to speak, washed my hands in the blood of the martyr, Malcolm X, whose retreat from the precipice of madness created new room for others to turn about in, and I am now caught up in that tiny space, attempting a maneuver of my own. Having renounced the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, I found that the rebirth does not follow automatically, of its own accord, that a void is left in one's vision, and this void seeks constantly to obliterate itself by pulling one back to one's former outlook. I have tried a tentative compromise by adopting a selective vocabulary, so that now when I see the white of their eyes, instead of saying devil or beast, I say imperialist or colonialist, and everyone seems to be happier. In silence, we have spent our years watching the Orpheus, trying to understand them, on the principle that you have a better chance of coping with the known than with the unknown. Some of us have been, and some still are, interested in learning whether it is ultimately possible to live in the same territory with people who seem so disagreeable to live with. Still others want to get as far away from Orpheus as possible. What we share in common is a desire to break the Orpheus power over us. At times of fundamental social change, such as the era in which we live, it is easy to be deceived by the onrush of events, beguiled by the craving for social stability into mistaken transitional phenomena for enduring reality. Yo, when I said this dude, this dude went in. Did you get that last part? Did I read it straight enough for it to make sense? Let me see if I can get some Pepsi money real quick. Let me see if I can get some Pepsi money. I need to stop. Somebody gonna shoot my ass dead. Is it Rasta man? He says, at times of fundamental social change, such as the era in which we live, it is easy to be deceived by the onrush of events, beguiled by the craving for social stability into mistaking transitional phenomena for enduring reality. The strength and permanency of white backlash in America is just such an illusion. However much this rear guard action might seem to grow in strength, the initiative and the future rests with those whites and blacks who have liberated themselves from the master slave syndrome, and these are to be found mainly among the youth. Over the past 12 years, there have surfaced a political conflict between the generation that is deeper even than the struggle between the races. Over, over the past 12 years, there have surfaced a political conflict between the generations that is deeper even than the struggle between the races. Its first dramatic manifestation was within the ranks of the Negro people, when college students in the South, fed up with Uncle Tom's hand-in-hand approach to revolution, threw off the yoke of the NAACP. When these students initiated the first cities, their spirit spread like a raging fire across the nation, and the technique of nonviolent direct action, constantly refined and honed into a sharp cutting tool, swiftly matured. The older Negro Corps leaders, who are now all die-hard advocates of these tactics, scolded the students for sitting in. The students rained down contempt upon their hoary heads. In the preceding days, these conservative leaders had always succeeded in putting down insurgent elements among the Negro people. A measure of their power prior to the students' rebellion is showed by their success in isolating such great black men as the late W.E.B. Du Bois and Paul Robeson. When these stalwarts, refusing to bite their tongue, lost favor with the U.S. government by their unstinted efforts to link up the Negro Revolution with national liberation movements around the world. The quote Negro leaders and the whites who depended upon them to control their people were outraged by the impudence of the students. Calling for a moratorium on student initiatives, they were greeted instead by an encore of sittings and retired to their ivory towers to contemplate the new phenomenon. Others, less prudent because held on a tighter leash by the whites, had their careers brought to an abrupt end because they thought they could lead a black and white backlash against the students, only to find themselves in a kind of bay of pigs. Negro college presidents, who expelled students from all Negro colleges in an attempt to quash the demonstration, ended up losing their jobs. The victorious students would no longer allow them to preside over the campuses. The spontaneous protests on southern campuses over the repressive measures of their college administrations were an earnest forerunner of the free speech upheavals which years later was to shake up the University of California campus at Berkeley. You remember the revolution at Berkeley that Victoria Sweet was alluding to in Slow Medicine? That's what he's talking about. That was started with the inspiration from what these black college students started. In countless ways, the revolution of the black students served as catalyst for the brewing revolt of the whites. This next paragraph struck a chord with me that I had to write on the side of it, that this is the opposite of today, and at the bottom I wrote, this generation of orphans are not appalled. So let me read this part right here real quick, right? It says, What has suddenly happened is that the white race has lost its heroes. Once its heroes has been revealed as villains and its greatest heroes as arch-villains. The new generations of whites, appalled by the sanguine and despicable record carved over the face of the globe by their race, in the last 500 years are rejecting the panoply of white heroes, whose heroism consisted in erecting the inglorious edifice of colonialism and imperialism. Heroes whose careers rested on a system of foreign and domestic exploitation, rooted in the myth of white supremacy and the manifest destiny of the white race. They're pretty much saying there's a whole generation of white people 50 years ago who realized that the white supremacy following is bullshit. You know what I mean? It's wrong. You know what I mean? That's I'm saying that as much as I would like to believe that's how it is right now, I'm seeing a lot of young white people in this day and age, not that many, but there's a lot who are buying into this what this idiot and his cohorts are perpetuating. You know what I mean? Like, it is sad, and social media is not helping the cause. You know what I mean? If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Forgive me, but we'll see. The emerging shape of a new world order and the requisites for survival in such a world are fostering in young whites a new outlook. They recoiled in shame from the spectacle of cowboys and pioneers, their heroic forefathers whose exploits filled earlier generations with pride, galloping across a movie screen shooting down Indians like coke bottles. Even Winston Churchill, who was looked upon by all the whites as perhaps the greatest hero of the 20th century, even he, because of the system of which he was a creature and which he served, is the arch-villain in the eyes of the young white rebels. At the close of World War II, national liberation movements in the colonized world picked up new momentum and audacity, seeking to cash in on the democratic promises made by the Allies during the war. The Atlantic Charter, signed by President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill in 1941, affirming and quote, the rights of all people to choose the form of government under which they may live, close quote, established the principle, although it took years of post-war struggle to give this piece of rhetoric even the appearance of reality. And just as world revolution has prompted the oppressed to re-evaluate their self-image in terms of the changing condition, to slot off the servile attitude inculcated by long years of subordination, the same dynamics of change have prompted the white people of the world to re-evaluate their self-image as well, to disabuse themselves of the master race philosophy, of the master race psychology developed over centuries of imperial hegemony. It is among the white youth of the world that the greatest change is taking place. It is they who are experiencing the great psychic pain of waking into consciousness to find their inherited heroes turned by events into villains. Communication and understanding between the older and younger generation of whites has entered a crisis. The elders, who in the tradition of privileged classes or races genuinely do not understand the youth, trapped by old ways of thinking and blind to the future, have only just begun to be vexed, because the youth have only just begun to rebel. So thoroughgoing is the revolution in the psyches of white youth that the traditional tolerance which every older generation has found it necessary to display is quickly exhausted, leaving a gulf of fear, hostility, mutual misunderstanding, and contempt. The rebellion of the oppressed people of the world, along with the Negro Revolution in America, have opened the way to a new evaluation of history, a re-examination of the role played by the white race. White race, 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 Columbus accidentally discovering America was part of that European expansion. It wasn't the beginning, it was part of it. It was in the midst of it. The rebellion of the oppressed peoples of the world, along with the Negro Revolution in America, have opened the way to a new evaluation of history, a re-examination of the role played by the white race since the beginning of European expansion. The positive achievements are also there in the record, and future generations have applauded them. And future generations will applaud them. But there can be no applause now, not while the master still holds the whip in his hand. Not even the master's own children can find it possible to applaud him. He cannot even applaud himself. The negative rings too loudly. Slave catchers, slave owners, murderers, butchers, invaders, oppressors. The white heroes have acquired new names. The great white statesmen whom school children are taught to revere are revealed as the architects of systems of human exploitation and slavery. Religious leaders are exposed as condoners and justifiers of all these evil deeds. School teachers and college professors are seen as the clique of brainwashers and whitewashers. The white youth of today are coming to see intuitively that to escape the honors of history their fathers made, they must face and admit the moral truth concerning the works of their fathers. Trump wasn't one of those that was willing to face the sins of his father. There are such venerated figures as George Washington. Okay. There are such venerated figures as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson owned hundreds of black slaves, that all the presidents up to Lincoln presided over a slave state, and that every president since Lincoln connived politically and cynically with the issues affecting the human rights and general welfare of the broad masses of the American people. These facts weigh heavily upon the hearts of these young people. Okay. So on the side of this right here, you can probably see the Obama more than anything. I wrote Obama's difference and impacts, because this paragraph is saying that such venerated figures as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson owned hundreds of black slaves, that all the presidents up to Lincoln presided over a slave state, and that every president since Lincoln connived politically and cynically with the issues affecting the human rights and general welfare of the broad masses of the American people. These facts weigh heavily upon the hearts of these young people. Every president since Lincoln connived politically and cynically, except Obama. Obama actually tried to actually make sure that issues affecting the broad masses were alleviated and lessened on the shoulders of those broad masses. That's why I said President Obama is top 4 greatest president ever. He goes Washington. The other reason was because Washington was the first, and he saw some things, he knew of some things. He was a man of his time, so he owned slaves, obviously. But Washington, Adams because he, even though he was a man of the time, he chose not to own slaves, and he didn't own slaves. Lincoln, for obvious reason, then Obama. Yes, you know what I mean, I skipped Teddy. I should literally throw Teddy in there. If anything, I will put Teddy, it's an Obama 4A and 4B. That part. The elders do not like to give these youngsters credit for being able to understand what is going on and what has gone on. When speaking of juvenile delinquency or the rebellious attitudes of today's youth, the elders employ a glib rhetoric. They speak of the quote alienation of youth, the desire of the young to be independent, the problems of the quote father image and the quote mother image, and their impact upon growing children who lack sound models upon which to pattern themselves. But they consider it bad form to connect the problems of the youth with the central events of our era, the national liberation movements abroad and the Negro Revolution at home. The foundations of authority have been blasted to bits in America because the whole society has been indicted, tried, and convicted of injustice. To the youth, the elders are ugly Americans. To the elders, the youth have gone mad. The rebellion of the white youth have gone through four broadly discernible stages. First, there was an initial recoiling away, a rejection of the conformity which America expected and had, and had always received, sooner or later, from its youth. The disaffected youth were refusing to participate in this system, having discovered that America, far from helping the underdog, was up to its ears in the mud, trying to hold the dog down. Because of the publicity and self-advertisements of the more vocal rebels, this period has come to be known as the beatnik era, although not all the youth affected by these changes thought of themselves as beatniks. The howl of the beatniks and their scathing, outraged denunciation of the system, characterized by Ginsburg as Moloch, a bloodthirsty Semitic deity to which the ancient tribes sacrificed their firstborn children, was a serious, irrevocable declaration of war. It is revealing that the elders looked upon the beatniks as as mere obscene misfits who were too lazy to take baths and too stingy to buy a haircut. The elders had eyes but couldn't see, ears but couldn't hear. Not even when the message came through as clearly as in this remarkable passage from Jack Kerouac's On the Road. At lilac evening, I walked with every muscle aching among the lights of the 27th and welting in the Denver colored section, wishing I were a Negro, feeling that the best the white world had offered was not enough ecstasy for me, not enough life, joy, kicks, darkness, music, not enough night. I wish I were a Denver Mexico. I was a Denver Mexican, or even a poor shovel walk jab. Anything but what I saw drearily was a white man disillusioned. All my life I'd had white ambitions. I passed the dark porches of Mexican and Negro homes. Soft voices were there. Occasionally the dusky knee of some mysteriously sensuous gal. The dark faces of the man behind rose arbors. Little children sat like sages in ancient rocking chairs. The second stage arrived when these young people, having decided emphatically that the world, and particularly the United States, the USA, was unacceptable to them in its present form, began an active search for roles they could play in changing the society. If many of these young people were content to lay up in their cool beat pads, smoking pot and listening to jazz in a perpetual orgy of esoteric bliss, there were others less crushed by the system who recognized the need for positive action. Malak could not ask for anything more than to have its disaffected victims withdraw into safe, passive, apolitical, little non-participatory islands, in an economy less and less able to provide jobs for the growing pool of unemployed. If all the unemployed had followed the lead of the beatniks, Moloch would gleefully have legalized the use of euphoric drugs and marijuana, passed out free jazz albums and sleeping bags to all those willing to sign the affidavit promising to remain beat. The non-beat disenfranchised white youth were attracted magnetically to the Negro Revolution, which had begun to take on a mass insurrectionary tone. If they had difficulty understanding their relationship to the Negro and what roles quote, whites could play in the quote, Negro Revolution, for the first time they watched the Negro activists from afar. For the time being, they watched the Negro activists from afar. The third stage, which is rapidly drawing to a close, emerged when white youth started joining Negro demonstrations in large numbers. The presence of whites among the demonstrators emboldened the Negro leaders and allowed them to use tactics they never would have been able to employ with all black troops. The racist conscience of America is such that murder does not register as murder really unless the victim is white. And it was only when the newspaper and magazines started carrying pictures and stories of white demonstrators being beaten and maimed by mobs and police that the public began to protest. Negroes have become so used to this double standard that they too react differently to the death of a white. When white freedom riders were brutalized along with blacks, a sigh of relief went up from the black masses because the blacks knew that white blood is the current of freedom in a land where for 400 years black blood has been shed unremarked and with impunity. America has never truly been outraged by the murder of a black man, woman, or child. Listen, listen to these words. Oh. In case you know the song you ain't heard, he said, until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is eradicated, there will always be war. You know. When white freedom riders were brutalized along with blacks, a sigh of relief went up among from the black masses. Because the blacks knew that white blood is the current of freedom in a land where for 400 years black blood has been shed unremarked and with impunity. America has never truly been outraged by the murder of a black man, woman, or child. White politicians may, if Negroes are aroused by a particular murder, say with their lips what they know with their minds they should feel with their hearts, but don't. She's awesome, y'all. He said, white politicians may, if Negroes are aroused by a particular murder, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, say with their lips what they know with their minds they should feel with their hearts, but don't. It is a measure of what the Negro feels. It is a measure of what the Negro feels that when the two white and one black civil rights workers were murdered in Mississippi in 1964, the event was welcomed by Negroes on on a level of understanding beyond and deeper than the grief they felt for the victims and their families. This welcoming of violence and death, in the inevitable words oft repeated by Negroes that those whites and blacks did not die in vain. So it was with Mrs. Viola Liuzzo, and much of the anger which Negroes felt towards Martin Luther King during the Battle of Selma stemmed from the fact that he denied history a great movement, never to be recaptured when he turned tail on the Edmund Pettus Bridge and refused to all those whites behind him what they had traveled thousands of miles to receive. If the police had turned them back by force, all those nuns, priests, rabbis, priests, and disenfranchised ladies and gentlemen, old and young, as they had done the Negroes a week earlier, the violence and brutality of the system would have been ruthlessly exposed. Or if seeing or if seeing King determined to lead them on to Montgomery, the troopers had stepped aside to avoid precisely the confrontation that Washington would not have tolerated. It would have signaled the capitulation of the militant White South. As it turned out, the March on Washington was a show of somewhat dim luster, stage managed by the establishment. But by this time, the young whites were already active participants in the Negro Revolution. In fact, they had begun to transform it into something broader, with the potential of encompassing the whole of America in a radical reordering of society. The fourth stage, now in its infancy, sees these white youth taking the initiative, using techniques learned in the Negro struggle to attack problems in the general society. The classic example of this new energy in action was the student battle at the University of California campus at Berkeley, California, the free speech movement. Leading the revolt were veterans of the civil rights movement, some of whom spent time on the firing line in the wilderness of Mississippi, Alabama. Flowing from the same momentum were student demonstrations against U.S. interference in the internal affairs of Vietnam, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic and the Congo, and the U.S. aid to apartheid in South Africa. The students were even aroused the intellectual community to action and positions unthinkable a few years ago. Witness the teachings. But their revolt is deeper than single issue. But their revolt is deeper than single issue protests. The characteristic of the white rebels which most alarmed their elders, the long hair, the new dances, their love for Negro music, their use of marijuana, their mystical attitude towards sex, are all tools of their rebellion. They have turned these tools against the totalitarian fabric of American society, and they mean to change it. From the beginning, America has been a schizophrenic nation. Its two conflicting images of itself was never reconciled, because never before has the survival of its most cherished myths become a reconciliation mandatory. Once before, during the British struggle between North and South climaxed by the Civil War, the two images of America came into conflict, although white North and South scarcely understood it. The image of America held by its most alienated citizens was advanced neither by the North nor by the South. It was perhaps best described by Frederick Douglass, who was born into slavery in 1817, escaped to the North, and became the greatest leader spokesman for the blacks of his era. In words that can still, years later, arouse an audience of black Americans, Frederick Douglass delivered in 1852 a scorching indictment in his 4th of July oration in Rochester. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim. To him your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parades and solemnity, are to him more bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation, as embodied in the two great political parties, is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 million of your countrymen. You hold your anathema at the crown-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria, and pride yourself on your democratic institutions, while you yourself consent to be the mere tools and bodyguards of the tyrants of Virginia and Carolina. You invite to your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad, honor them with banquets, greet them with ovation, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But the fugitive from your own land you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill. You glory in your refinement and your universal education, yet you maintain a system of barbarous and dreadful as ever stained the character of a nation. A system begun in avarice, supported in crime, and perpetuated in cruelty. You shed tears over fallen Hungary, and make the sad story of her wrongs the theme of your poets. statesmen, and orators, till your gallant sons are ready to fly to arms to vindicate her cause against the oppressor. But in regards to the 10,000 wrongs of the American slaves, you would enforce the strictest silence and would hail him as an enemy of the nation who dares to make these wrongs the subjects of public discourse. Wow. That was from Frederick Douglass in 1852. According to him, there were only how many million? How many million? 3 million black folks in America in 1852. This most alienated view of America was preached by the abolitionists and by Harriet Beecher Stowe in her Uncle Tom's Cabin. But such a view of America was too distasteful to receive wide attention, and serious debate about America's image and her reality was engaged in only on the fringes of society. Even when confronted with overwhelming evidence to the contrary, most white Americans have found it possible, after studying their vital nerves, to settle comfortably back into their vaunted belief that America is dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. With the with the Constitution for our rudder and the Declaration of Independence as a guiding star, the ship of state is sailing always towards a brighter vision of freedom and justice for all. Because there is no common ground between these two contradictory images of America, they had to be kept apart. But the moment the blacks were let into the white world, let out of the voiceless and faceless cages of their ghettos, singing, walking, talking, dancing, writing, and orating their image of America and of Americans, the white world was suddenly challenged to match its practice to its preachment. And this is why those whites who abandon the white image of America and adopt the black image are greeted with such unmitigated hostility by their elders. For all these years, whites have been taught to believe in the myths they preach, while Negroes have had to face the bitter reality of what America practiced. But without the lies and distortions, white Americans would not have been able to do the things they have done. When whites are forced to look honestly upon the objective proof of their deeds, the cement of mendacity, that's a good word, mendacity. Let me give the exact definition. Mendacity, Mendacic. It means the tendency to be untruthful, mendacious. Like, the current president has a natural God given talents for mendacity. The cement of mendacity holding white society together swiftly disintegrates. On the other hand, the core of the black world's vision remains intact, and in fact begins to expand and spread into the psychological territory vacated by the non-viable white lies, i.e., into the minds of young whites. It is remarkable how the system worked for so many years, how the majority of whites remained effectively unaware of any contradiction between their view of the world and their world itself. The mechanisms by which this was rendered possible requires examination at this point. Let us recall that the white man, in order to justify slavery and later on to justify segregation, elaborated a complex, all-pervasive myth which at one time classified the black man as a subhuman beast of burden. The myth was progressively modified, gradually elevating the blacks on the scale of evolution, following their slowly changing status until the plateau of equal until the plateau of separate but equal was reached at the close of the 19th century. During slavery, the black was seen as a mindless supermasculine menial, forced to do the back-breaking work. He was conceived in terms of his ability to do such work. Quote, field nigger example. The white man administered the plantation. administering the plantation, doing all the thinking, exercising omnipotent power over slaves. He had little difficulty disassociating himself from the black slaves. He could not conceive of their positions without he could not conceive of their positions being reversed or even reversible. Blacks and whites being conceived as mutually exclusive types. Those attributes imputed to the blacks could not also be imputed to the whites, at least not in equal degree, without blurring the lines separating the races. These images were based upon the social functions of the two races, the work they performed. The ideal white man was one who knew how to use his head, who knew how to manage and control things and get things done. Those whites who were not in a position to perform those functions nevertheless aspired to them. The ideal black man was one who did exactly as he was told and did it efficiently and cheerfully. Slaves, quote, as Frederick Douglass, are generally expected to sing as well as to walk. As the black man's position and function became more varied, the images of white and black having become stereotypes lagged behind. This separate but equal doctrine was promulgated by the Supreme Court in 1896. It was the same purpose domestically. It had the same purpose domestically as the opened up policy towards China in the international arena, to stabilize the situation and subordinate a non-white population so that racist exploiters could manipulate those people according to their own selfish interests. These doctrines were foisted off as the epitome of enlightened justice, the highest expression of morality. Sanctified by religion, justified by philosophy, and legalized by the Supreme Court, separate but equal was enforced by day by agencies of the law, and by the KKK and company under cover of night. Booker T. Washington, the Martin Luther King of his day, accepted separate but equal in the name of all Negroes. W.E.B. Du Bois denounced it. Separate but equal marked the last stage of the white man's flight into cultural neurosis and the beginning of the black man's frantic striving to assert his humanity and equalize his position with the white. Blacks ventured into all fields of endeavor to which they could gain entrance. Their goal was to present in all fields a performance that would equal or surpass that of the whites. It was long axiomatic among blacks that a black had to be twice as competent as a white in any field in order to gain grudging recognition from the whites. This proposed a pathological motivation. See? That axiom explains the whole Trump after Obama thing. Obama had to work twice as hard just to get there, and Trump didn't have to do shit. He just had to tell lies and be a racist. He ain't had to do shit, honestly. Russia did all the work for him. And we helped by not going out to vote for Hillary. Voting for Hillary, if you were black and voted for Hillary, it was like voting for Barack's policies, because it was a continuation of it. That's how white racists saw it. You know what I mean? This produced a pathological motivation in the blacks to equal or surpass the whites to maintain a distance from the blacks. This is the rack on which black and white America received their delicious torture. At first there was the color bar, flatly denying the blacks entrance to certain spheres of activity. When this no longer works and blacks invaded sector after sector of American life and economy, the whites evolved other methods of keeping their distance. The illusion of the Negro's inferior nature had to be maintained. You hear that? The illusion of us being inferior had to be maintained. You're not inferior, y'all. Don't let nobody fool you with that. That bullshit like that only happens in fucking America, yo. Don't let nobody fool you with that, yeah? I'm just saying. The illusion of the Negro's inferior nature had to be maintained. One device evolved by the whites was to tab whatever the black did with the prefix Negro. We had Negro literature, Negro athletes, Negro music, Negro doctors, Negro politicians, Negro workers. Like they try to make sure Barack Obama would only be remembered as the Negro president. I'm shit ain't changed, yo. These sentiments was from 50 years ago. You mean to tell me that don't sound like shit that's been going on today? Go ahead with that, man. The malignant ingeniousness of this device is that although it accurately describes an objective biological fact, or at least a sociological fact in America, it concealed the paramount physiological fact that to the white mind, prefixing anything with Negro automatically consigns it to an inferior